On the agenda tonight, we're taking another look at the Beatles with their rooftop performance of Get Back live in 1969. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So, unfortunately tonight and for the whole of today, my internet service provider, Virgin Media, have been down. There's been no internet for the whole of the day, including the nighttime now. So what we're going to be doing is taking another look at the Beatles back in 1969. This is one of those videos that, due to the subject material and the Beatles and copyrights, some of you guys might not have seen it the first time round. So what I'm going to do is include the link to the performance video in the description below and also pin it to the top of the comment section so you guys can go there, watch the video, and then come back here for the analysis, and I'll see you guys in the comments section. With the footage that we're looking at, don't worry if some of the images aren't synchronized with what we're hearing, because on the day they did 3 versions of Get Back, and that's what we can see, those 3 separate takes being edited together. So you might have heard some of that lead guitar being played on this song by John Lennon, but he's then playing rhythm when the lead's going on, so don't let that confuse you. Just as I've mentioned, the lead playing from John Lennon, super clean tone here. And a lot of people will say, why is George Harrison not playing the lead? It was just the fact that he left the band temporarily on the 10th of January, and this was the 30th of January, the same month. So it gives you an idea as to where the band were in terms of their relationships and staying together. It just so happened that George left the band and then John learnt the lead parts that were due to be played and then played them live, as well as on the final recorded version on the Let It Be album. I think when listening to some of the lead that George laid down, he obviously was a great lead guitarist, as I've shown in other videos where he's trading lines with Eric Clapton. So to hear John playing the lead on this song, it is different, and you can hear that he might not be as confident as George with lead work, especially considering that there aren't a lot of other techniques being injected into the lead section of this song. It is very much playing straight notes, playing the melody, and being very careful with the bends. George Harrison was a guy who, when he played lead, he did have that control of vibrato and slides and all the other techniques that are in there. Once you start to play a lot and really focus on lead guitar, you can start to get that guitar to express and have a voice, and George certainly had the ability to do that. This was all recorded for the Let It Be film, the rockumentary that they were making, and there were so many things up in the air with regard to the final performance for that film, which is what this turned into and why this was filmed. And they had so many different ideas about playing to just fan club members, or going on a cruise ship and going to Greece, I think, and filming it there in the ruins. But that was just seen as a bit of a far-fetched idea, and having fans of the Beatles on the cruise ship. There were so many things that were up in the air, like I said. So with that perspective, knowing that they had to do something by the end of the month in order to have it ready for the film, we can see why this happened and why it was only really set in stone a few days before they came to record this. Talking about the 26th, the 27th, the 28th of January, and they're thinking, we've got to do something by the end of the month. And this is what they decided on. The premises that they're playing on the top of is the premises that they bought for their Apple record label that they'd set up. So it was convenient in that way. But it was less convenient in getting electricity to the roof, and a lot of people might think, how did they set it up? Where were the plug sockets on the roof? And what they did was literally run the electricity from the basement studio of the property to the roof. And this also brings up another question about the health and safety, because on the day it happened to be cold and raining and a bit windy. So any moisture that could get into those electrical connections, I think nowadays it would have been cooled off with health and safety in mind of the performers, and moisture and electricity not getting on particularly well. But like I've already mentioned, the nature of when they're performing this and the deadline that they've got to get something done just meant that they went ahead, and even though there were a few spots of rain, they just continued on forward. So analysing this performance from a technical perspective, we've got to deal with something here that we wouldn't have in the studio, which are the elements. And the rain, the wind is the big one that you want to worry about because of that hitting the microphones, as I have demonstrated before on this channel. You get a nasty sound that you do not want on your final recording when wind hits a microphone. So, in order to counteract this, we have wind shields and wind covers, the foam covers that you'll see on the microphones that break up the wind before it actually hits the microphone. And in this particular performance, it's interesting because we've got Glenn Jones, who is taking care of the sound, the production, but he also sent Alan Parsons on the day to buy underwear from the store to wrap around the microphones that didn't have the foam protection on there. All things considered, the sound that we're getting here is pretty good. And the official video on the Beatles channel on YouTube of Don't Let Me Down, that is a remastered version, and that sounds excellent considering the setup that they had on the day and all of those elements that you can't really predict. You just have to counteract them as much as you can, but they did a great job on the day. Talking about the live execution of this song on the rooftop, we've got Billy Preston here on keys as well, which adds so much to the composition. And when we have this classic blues setup, we've always got that call and response. So we've got Paul McCartney, who, when he ends his vocal phrases, is then responded to by a hook. And generally, it'll be a lead guitar hook. There'll be a little bit of keys in there from Billy. Also, when you're singing this song in your head, you also sing the hooks between the vocal phrases because they are simple, they are memorable, they're melodic. And that is the key to having a great response to a great vocal line, and why this song is so repeatable and something that just sticks in your head and you can't get it out of your head once you start singing it. Another reason why it went to #1 everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Pretty much every country that listened to music and had a chart, Get Back went to #1. The other thing to mention about the elements is that on January the 30th, 1969, it wasn't a warm day. It was about 7 or 8 degrees Celsius, which would be about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. So that's why you've got Ringo wearing his wife's jacket and John's wearing Yoko's fur coat. So they were wrapped up warm. You've got to factor that in for guitar playing as well. Cold hands and guitar playing don't mix generally, especially with more technical playing. Fortunately, there's not a lot of really fast passages that the Beatles are playing through here. When I mentioned that they did 3 takes of Get Back with this performance, the first 2 were at the beginning of the set, and then this last one was right at the end before they were told to stop by the police. But the interesting thing about this song on the album is that they edited in, Phil Spector edited in the ending where John says, "I hope we pass the audition." So you had that on the album track. Just quickly diving into the recording process of how this track came to be on the album, because they had one version of it that they recorded on the 27th of January, and it was take 11 of the song, and everything was great with that apart from the ending. So they weren't sure about it. They did exactly the same thing the next day, January the 28th, and they didn't like the beginning part, but the ending part was how they wanted it to finish. So they just spliced up these 2 takes, glued them together, and they did such a great job in the studio that you'd never tell. These shots that we have with the police in the background, that would have definitely been the last performance of the day, and it has been cut together and edited with the footage from those first 2 takes. The other thing is that on the last take, there was an ad-lib from Paul about the police being there, and he just worked it into the song saying, "You've been playing on the roofs again. You know your mama doesn't like it. She's going to have you arrested. And that was just referring to the police, who definitely would have made themselves known on the roof at that point, and they knew that they had to stop. Looking back at this performance, the Beatles were always so tight live. And this is what you take from the performances on the roof, but just throughout their whole career, considering that with this track in particular, they obviously weren't playing it the same every time in the studio. Otherwise, they would have had one take of the song that they liked, because that's how they had written it. I know that George Harrison, for this performance, did get Billy involved on keys as a way to try and get everybody to see this as a serious performance and put in a lot of effort and focus on it. It's also interesting to think that the Beatles were looking at so many different possibilities of performances. There were so many different ideas being thrown around, and they had to come up with this performance for the end of the film that was being made. And it just so happened that the easiest solution of just setting up on the roof of the building that you own was the best solution, because it was something that hadn't been done before and copied a lot since, by the way. But having such a simple solution that had such an impact, everybody knows the rooftop performance in 1969. They didn't get any permission from the local authorities or the police, to the point where the police closed it down. So it was dramatic in that sense, because they were potentially doing something that they didn't know if it was legal or not, but they would just go ahead and do it. And that is what rock and roll is all about. Even though the Beatles aren't seen as hellraisers back in the 60s, they were very well dressed and very straightforward and just four really nice guys. But to do something like this showed that actually they didn't care about the consequences, they just did it. And it's really cool to watch that and know afterwards that it was so spur of the moment, that it was just a few days before and they just got out there and nailed the performance. It's interesting as well that last night I did a video on Little Richard, and I mentioned about him going on tour in the UK in the early 60s, and then the Beatles opened for him and they got talking so that Paul McCartney could do a version of Long Tall Sally and other Little Richard songs in the Little Richard way, because he showed Paul how to do all of these things vocally. And with this performance, of course, Paul is so solid vocally, but he has that ability to lean into that chest voice sound and get that rasp that Little Richard was so good at as well. So it's great to see all of the influences that cross over in the industry from one artist to the next, especially when they play the same shows and share what they know about music, because that's what it's all about. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!